Howdy, I'm Robert Edmondson, biologist with the Texas A&M Forest Service, and today I have Dr. David Apple, professor and extension specialist with the Department of Plant Pathology and Microbiology at Texas A&M University, and we're going to talk a little bit about oak wilt. There are several ways that you can manage the disease: prevention, planting other trees to reduce the effect of the disease, trenching, and then finally injection. Today, Dr. Apple will talk about the injection process and demonstrate on how to properly inject a tree.
Thank you, Robert. We've got several phases to this process that we're going to be talking about today. Now, first of all, we thought we'd talk about some of the equipment that is needed to inject a tree, which we have right here laid out on this bench. The injection technique depends on drilling holes into a tree and then pumping the fungicide into the tree through a system of tubing and tees that are called a harness kit, which is this kit right here. You can see this is a simply plastic tubing with these little tees that are inserted into holes that are drilled into the base of the tree with a drill like this. Then you hook the system up to the tank right here, in which you've got the fungicide, and then you simply put a little pressure on it and push the material into the tree. We also depend on the tree taking up the fungicide on its own. Some of the other equipment we have here are the shovels, hose, these sorts of things that are needed to expose the root system on the tree. This system is called the macro system for injecting trees, which means that we're going to be putting a high volume of water and fungicide into the tree, and it also depends on injecting the tree below the soil line, which is why we need all the digging equipment here. Oh, and I also might mention that the injection technique depends on measuring the tree to see the volume and rate of the fungicide that you're going to be putting into the tree. So the very first step in injection is to decide why you're injecting the tree. For example, the tree might be at a distance away from the oak wilt, and we would try to get a preventative treatment into the tree in this case. In that case, we're trying to get the fungicide into the tree before the fungus gets into the tree. We might also be injecting a tree that already has oak wilt, and that's why it's important to measure the tree and to determine the rate, because a tree that already has oak wilt is going to require getting more fungicide than the tree that you are treating for a preventative treatment. All of this is explained on the label of the fungicide. Now, I've got a bottle of Alamo right here with the label attached to it, and everything we're going to be talking about today is explained on the label. And it is absolutely critical that before anybody attempts to inject a tree, you need to read the label to make sure that you're doing it in the proper fashion. Alamo is not the only fungicide on the market for oak wilt control. We've also got Propizol right here. You can see the two different colors here. You can keep them straight like that. And the choice of these different products, they are all pretty much the same. It's just that there are different distributors, manufacturers that have different fungicides on the market.
Dr. Apple, do you have to have a pesticide applicator's license to inject your own tree?
Well, certainly if you are charging, if you're in the business of injecting trees, and there are a lot of people that do this commercially, if you're in the business for injecting trees and you're charging for it, then yes, you need a pesticide applicator's license. But the injection technique, this particular injection technique, was originally designed with the homeowner in mind as well. People are able to do this as long as you're not charging on it. You can do this on your own trees as well without a pesticide applicator's license. I might mention that tree injection is a deceptively simple process. As I've already explained, all we are doing is drilling holes and getting the fungicide into the tree. However, there are several steps in the process that are very important that in order to get the tree injected successfully have to be done properly. And one of those is the very first step, and that is excavating the root system of the tree. And that is going to be the very first step that we talk about and demonstrate in this video.
Dr. Apple, you said treating the trees was actually a pretty simple process, but this looks a little complicated. Could you walk us through the preparation of the tree?
Well, sure. Once you've selected the tree, and we have selected this tree, we're on the A&M campus right now, and it's near an old oak wilt center that has been spreading for many years, and a lot of treatments have been done to manage the disease here. And so once you've selected the tree, we need to decide what technique we're going to use to inject it. And in this case, as I've mentioned, we're going to use the macro system, which means we need to expose the root flare system on the tree. Research has shown in the past that if you get below the soil line onto the root flares of the trees, you'll get better distribution of the fungicide as it moves through the tree up into the trunk and out into the branches. So in this case, it's a very simple process of digging the soil back. We want to be careful not to damage the roots, because if you damage the roots, you put a hole in the roots, you're going to end up having leakages. And we realize that it's practically impossible to dig a root system out like this and not damage it in a few places. But care should always be taken to damage the root system as little as possible. And all we're trying to do here is get at these root flares below the soil line of the tree. We've got various kinds of digging tools that we use. I like to use hay hooks because they damage the tree less than using spades or trowels or something like that. As you can see, JT Motlock here, a technician in my laboratory, is digging away in this manner right here and trying to locate where the major roots are without damaging them. Robert over here, Robert Hawthorne, is digging away right here because he knows out in that part of the soil there's probably no roots, so we're just trying to get this soil back away from the tree where he's working. This process does take a while when you're doing it by hand. Today we're just doing one tree, but somebody that has to do dozens of trees at a time will use an instrument called an air spade, for example, that blows the soil away from the root system. And it's a very nice technique to use, but it does require some heavy equipment, a large air compressor, and the actual air spade itself to do the equipment. So when you're just doing a few trees, you can go ahead and use implements like this. Just be careful, don't damage the roots when you're doing the excavation. We're trying to get out maybe 2 or 3 feet. If you can see over here, we've already got some of the major flare roots right here excavated and ready to be treated. And as soon as we get done with this part of the tree, then we'll start showing how to mix the chemical and drill the holes.
Dr. Apple, it seems like a whole lot of work digging these trees out. Is it absolutely necessary to treat in the flares?
Well, there's a lot of discussion about that sort of thing, Robert. And we feel that based on the research that goes back 40, 50 years with the old Dutch elm disease injections, that the best way to get good, superior distribution is to get as low on the tree as possible. The amount of fungicide and the volume of water are determined on the diameter of the tree, what is called the diameter breast height, or DBH, and we use what is called, we call them a D-tape right here, that is a special tape which will give us the diameter of the tree in what we call diameter inches. All right, so we have a 22-inch tree here. Now with Alamo and also Propofol, we're then going to add 1 liter of water for each diameter inch of the tree, which is around 22 inches on this tree. And then we are going to add the appropriate amount of fungicide per liter of water. So in this case, since this is going to be a preventative treatment, we are going to treat at the rate of 10 milliliters of fungicide per each liter of water that goes into the tree. So we've got 22 inches, 22 liters of water, 10 milliliters of fungicide per liter, which gives us 220 milliliters of fungicide are going to be injected into the tree.
How far out would be too far for a preventative treatment?
I would never go any farther than 100 feet. Once the fungus gets within 100 feet, and we always watch the tree population for symptoms to try to judge about where the fungus is. But once it gets within 75 to 100 feet, that's the time to get the fungicide in. You don't want to get it in too soon because it might slow down, the fungus might slow down, and it might be a few years before it gets there. And we think the fungicide lasts maybe up to a year, year and a half, 2 years in the tree, somewhere in that range before it needs to be retreated. So therefore, it's a good idea to try to judge where the fungus is and then get it within that 75 to 100 foot range.
Now, if we don't have one of these fancy D-tapes, can we use just a regular measuring tape?
You can use a regular measuring tape, and in that case, you divide by 3. If you're just going to use regular inches, just go ahead and divide by 3, and that'll get you in the ballpark of the right concentration.
Okay, Dr. Apple, so we've measured the tree, determined it was 22 inches in diameter, and that we were going to use a preventative dosage. Walk us through the process on how to mix the chemical.
Okay, so we're using a 2-tank system here, which is usually common with a tree of this size. We're up over 20 inches, and so it's considered to be a fairly large tree for an injection. So we're going to use 2 tanks, and we'll explain how we hook up the tanks in just a minute. But first of all, we're going to mix the chemical, as you said. So I'm going to start with 8 liters of a fungicide-water mix in each of the tank. So with 8 liters, I'm going to be adding 10 milliliters per liter of water, 10 milliliters of fungicide per liter of water into the tank. Now, it's always good to go ahead and put the fungicide in first and then chase it with the water in order to facilitate the mixing of the fungicide in the water. So these bottles, both the Alamo and the Propofol, both have these applicator bottles in which you can measure out the amount of fungicide that you're going to be putting into the tank. In this case, I'm going to put 8 liters, so I'm going to put 80 milliliters of fungicide into the bottle. So as I squeeze it like this, it fills up to 80 milliliters. Right here, it's graduated on there. Then we remove the top out of the tank, pour the fungicide in. Okay. And then we're going to add our 8 liters of water.
Tell me when.
Okay. And that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we're going to go right to there. That's good, right there. Now you're going to notice with these tanks, we've got some nice tanks here that have a pressure release valve on it. That's always handy, but not all tanks come with a pressure relief. But it does come in handy later on in the injection process to have this pressure relief on it. Then we have modified this garden sprayer. This is just a regular garden sprayer, and we've taken the wand off of it and hooked our own tubing into it right here. And in our case, we've got a cutoff valve right here in the tubing, and we've also got a pressure gauge right here. Now the pressure gauge isn't because we have to keep the pressure at constant pressure the whole time, but it's just good to make sure that you aren't putting too much pressure into the system.
Okay, Dr. Apple, so we've excavated the tree, we've measured, we've determined all of our dosage and how much chemical we're putting in. Just a couple of questions before we get started. When's the best time to treat the tree?
Well, it is highly recommended that you try to start injecting the tree as early in the day as you can, when the maximum amount of transpiration is going on of the movement through the water of the tree. So we try to start early in the morning. Generally, we recommend that you really shouldn't start a tree afternoon, 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon at the latest, because you'd like the whole process to get done over with in the first day that you're treating. If you do not complete an injection process within 24 hours or so, if there's still fungicide left in the tree, it means that the tree's probably never going to end up taking up all the liquid. And this does happen occasionally. So that's one thing to be aware of. Now, also, we can think about when seasonally the best time to inject a tree is. And conventional thinking is that the best time to treat a tree is in the springtime after we get full flush, with all the leaves are back out, and that's going to be what, April or so, when April or May, when the trees get into full expansion. One time that people try to avoid is the period when the live oaks are in the transition and they're losing a lot of their leaves and new leaves are coming on. We usually recommend to try to wait until after that process is over with. We also find that when temperatures get down to freezing or so, that the Elm researched harness kit gets very brittle and we get lots of leaks and that sort of thing. So I'd say also when temperatures during the late fall are getting down into the low 40s or something, it's probably a good time to back off in injecting then. But certainly we always have the consideration that the fungus is advancing toward the tree, or if we're doing a therapeutic treatment and we've got symptoms in the tree, and during those times it's very difficult to have to wait too long. In those times we say try to get the injection done as quickly as possible.
What about when it's really hot and really dry?
So when we get into temperatures above 90, 95 degrees and there's very low soil moisture, we generally recommend to try to wait till things cool down a little bit before we treat then. And if the decision is made that you absolutely have to treat during that period, then we recommend going ahead and putting some water the tree down the day before, so the tree does have some soil moisture to facilitate the uptake and distribution of the fungicide.
Why don't you show us the process?
Okay, now this is the part of the process that probably is the most difficult, and that is drilling the proper holes around the tree. And there's several considerations that have to be taken into account. For example, how deep a hole do we drill? We generally like to drill a hole that goes about a ½ an inch into the active sapwood of the tree. And generally we recommend to people that you watch the filings coming out of the hole as you're drilling. And once you see the white filings coming out of the hole as you're drilling, then go about another ½ inch and you should be able to hit those active xylem vessels, the vessels that are carrying the water, and that's the target. We want to get the fungicide into those xylem vessels. Now, we generally with a tree, with a live oak, we have noticed down through the years that we end up putting about 3 to 3.5 injection ports per inch diameter. So I would guess with this tree right here, we're probably going to end up with about 65, 70 injection ports on the tree, maybe a little more, 70, 75, in that range. And that is, we try to put the injection ports about 3.5 to 4 inches apart as we go around. You're also going to notice that I'm going to try to get down as close to the bottom of the roots as possible. And the reason we do that is because we are considering the fact that we may have to inject this tree again. And we don't want to stack the wounds up too closely together. So let's say we come back in a year and a half, the tree next to this one is showing symptoms, there's an enormous amount of disease pressure. We may even see a few symptoms showing up on the treated tree, so we're going to decide to inject it again. We will re-excavate, not quite as far, but we will try to space the next injections a few inches away from the original injection so that these wounds don't stack up too much on the tree. So with that, I think the best way to demonstrate is just to go ahead and start doing it. Now JT, you're going to notice JT is going to be going around behind me and putting the tees into the tree. And the reason for that is you don't want to leave a lot of time between drilling the hole and beginning the injection process. As soon as you start drilling, you start putting the tubing and tees into the tree, and in that way we will be able to take advantage of the sapwood that is still functioning. Okay, so JT is going to start putting the tees in. Now you will notice that JT puts the tees in finger tight. You don't want to bang on the tees, you want to get them in finger tight. One of the conventions is when you push the tee in and twist it a little bit, it will squeak.
So if I'm looking at this correctly, it appears that you're going down one side of the root and back down the other side.
That's exactly
and
right.
backing up.
Yes. That's another reason why we like to excavate the root system. It gives us more surface area in order to spread out our injection ports. For example, if we put 60 injection ports up here, they would be very close together and you'd be stacking the wounds up. Here we can spread them out, which is good. All right, we've drilled all the holes, we've inserted the tees and tubing, the harness kit is set up now. We've connected a tank on the opposite side of the tree into the line, which I'm going to do right here. So we've left 2 tees unhooked right here to hook our tank up. So the system is now closed. We've got 2 tanks. Each tank is bleeding into opposite directions as we tap into the harness kit right here. And so now we're going to go ahead and fill the harness kit with fungicide. Now I'm going to go ahead and both tanks, we've got our valves closed right now. So I'm going to open this tank so that there's not going to be any pressure on it. And we're going to push the fungicide out of that tank through the harness kit and into this tank right here. And then once the harness kit, all the air has been pushed out of the harness kit and the system looks like it's closed and there's no more air in it, then I'll go ahead and tighten this down, pressurize it, and then we'll be able to let the tree go ahead and start taking the fungicide out. All right, so on that side, Robert, I'm going to go ahead and open mine on this side. You open your valve on that side and start very slowly pumping the fungicide into the harness kit. Now this is a good stage in the process that we have a mallet, because inevitably in a few places there is going to be a little bit of leakage. It's nothing to worry about, but you go ahead and watch the system, and when you've got one that's leaking, you just very lightly tap it with the mallet. So we've got one over here. Where is that, Rob? Okay, right here. And so I just take it and give it a few light taps like that. And then I watch it, and I can see that that one's now closed off. Oh, we've got a good leaker right here. So we go ahead and tap it shut. So we've got all the air out of the system now. The fungicide is flowing into this tank. I'm going to tighten this tank down. And that means the system is now completely sealed. And I'm going to start putting some pressure on this side over here, very gently. So I'm up to about 15 pounds pressure now on this side. And you can see we've pumped fungicide into this tank now. That's why we don't fill the tanks completely, so that we have room to move back and forth like this. Okay, so now as the injection process proceeds, we can see that this tank is starting to go down, and that allows us the opportunity to go ahead and make up for the rest of the fungicide, which we need to add to the tree. If you recall, this 22-inch tree was going to end up taking 22 liters of a fungicide-water mix. We started with 8 liters in each tank, which means that we started with 16 liters total. We're now going way down in this tank. So now we're going to go ahead and add the rest, the 6 liter back to the system. Now, because we have a 2-tank system here, as I mentioned earlier, it's a very simple process. Turning off the tank on this side, we shut the valve, then take the lid off this tank, and the pressure releases. And then we've got pre-mixed 6 liters of water here with the fungicide in it. And there we add the last 6 liters back. Tighten the lid, pressurize it a little bit. And then Robert's going to open the valve on this side. And we now have all the fungicide into the tanks that we're going to need to complete the injection of the tree. Now this process will probably proceed for another hour, maybe 2 hours, could be a little longer. And then once all the fungicide drains out of the tubing, it's a simple process of disconnecting the tanks from the harness kits. All we have to do is pull the tees and tubing out of the tree, and then we pull the soil back into around the tree. Now you don't need to do anything with the holes. The holes are completely protected right now because they're full of fungicide. And it is much better for the tree to be able to close the wounds if we just leave them alone. And that completes the injection of the tree for oak wilt control.